If the same problems keep happening in your organization over and over again, are they really just pesky one-off problems? Or are they the outcome of a system, just one you cannot see just yet? In trying to make organizations easier to understand, we made them clean, structured, logical. But in the process, we removed everything that was hard to measure. And removing things from frameworks doesn't make them disappear from real life. It only makes them invisible. And as we will see, the invisible things are often the ones shaping everything. In the previous video, we explored the history of strategy execution gap and the solutions organizations have tried over the years. We also found the mystery. No matter how many solutions are implemented, the challenge still persists. This suggests something else is at play, something we're still missing. So to find the answer, we will look at the clues hidden in plain sight. Lead our investigation. So, starting with the events and problems you probably already know. Let's check 6 quick situations. A team stalls, waiting on a delayed decision from their leader. They've completed everything they can, but the next move depends on a single approval. Days pass and momentum slows. Is there a way to make it happen faster? Who actually has the power to make this decision? Or who should have it? Second one. A client receives 2 different responses from different team members. Each believes they are doing the right thing, yet the inconsistency creates confusion and extra work. So are the instructions unclear, or is there something else at play? Could the right information be available sooner and to everyone involved? 3. An employee makes a mistake because they didn't have the information they needed. Not because anyone was careless, but because the flow of information didn't reach the right person at the right time. Why didn't the information arrive? Who decides what flows and when? And could this be anticipated ahead of time? Next one. A task isn't completed on time even though everyone was responsible for it. On paper, responsibilities are clear, yet the task slipped through the cracks. So where did accountability fail? Who had the authority to move things forward? Next one. Delegation sometimes creates more work instead of less. A project takes longer than it should. Overtime becomes the norm. Why does effort not match the outcome? Where are the bottlenecks? Who holds the power to unblock them? Last one. A strategy isn't executed because the team defaults to the usual initiatives. Plans were clear, objectives set, but habits and priorities take over. So why do the old routines win? How does the system shape which initiatives get attention? Do they sound familiar? These aren't unique incidents. They are moments most of you have seen and experienced, at least some of them. And they happen to different teams in different companies, yet they keep happening. On paper, structures are clear, responsibilities defined, decisions are mapped, information exists. And yet, delays pile up, mistakes happen, priorities conflict. But if everything visible seems correct, then what else could be causing these repeated problems? Taken alone, each of these moments feel like a normal workplace problem. Taken together, a strange yet familiar repetition begins to appear. Something, so far, invisible seems to be shaping the outcomes, guiding the same event to repeat across teams, projects, and organizations. And at what point do we stop treating them as one-off incidents and start asking whether they are part of a larger repeating pattern? To answer that, we need to change the way we look at them. Instead of asking, what went wrong here? What if we ask, where else does this happen? And once we zoom out, something surprising begins to appear. The stalled team waiting on a decision, the employee who didn't have the information they needed beforehand, the task that wasn't completed on time, and that strategy that never got executed. Look across teams, projects, even departments. Suddenly, these events don't feel random anymore. They start to repeat, and patterns emerge. So let's see that in a specific example. Take the stalled team waiting on leader's decision. On its own, it's just a delay. But look elsewhere. A project can move forward because a manager hasn't approved the next step. A budget sits in someone's inbox for days or weeks before being released. A client request lingers because it's unclear who has the final say. At first glance, these seem like separate, unrelated problems. But notice what's familiar. Each situation involves work waiting for a decision. Each involves a pause in action until someone else acts. Each of them repeats across teams, projects, and departments. Taken together, these incidents start to form a pattern. Work stalls whenever decision-making power accumulates or gets bottlenecked somewhere. Another recurring event appears whenever a new strategy is launched. Plans are clear, objectives are set, yet the team defaults to old routines. Where else do we see this? A team that continues running old projects even after a new priority is announced. A department that follows the same reporting routines instead of adopting a new process. An individual that focuses on familiar tasks rather than new strategic goals. Again, on surface, this may look like different problems. But when we connect the dots, again, the pattern emerges. The teams consistently default to familiar actions when new priorities are introduced. Step back and look at all these examples together. They were simple, but they were also very relevant to everyday life. Delays waiting for decisions, defaults to old routines, conflicting or duplicated work. Most of you have faced this. And at first they could seem like isolated problems, but now we see that they repeat, they keep repeating, and they form recognizable patterns. And the important point here is that we are not explaining why yet. We are simply observing that these events aren't random, that they repeat across teams, projects, departments, and that they form patterns in everyday work. And here, patterns are our first clue that something bigger is shaping outcomes. And that's exactly what we will explore next. The deeper structures that drive these patterns, what we call the invisible forces, that quietly shape behavior across the organization. If these events were truly random, then what most organizations do should work. Because most organizations try to fix the problems directly. They speed up decisions, they improve communication, they clarify roles. Everyone is fixing the specific problem, the isolated incidents. And for a moment, it does work. In most cases, the things move faster, deadlines are met, progress appears. It seems that there is alignment. It seems that there is the resolution. But then something familiar happens and the same issues come back. Sometimes slightly changed, sometimes in literally the same format. Decisions stall again, teams fall back into old routines, and a misalignment reappears, sometimes slightly disguised. And that's the contradiction. If the fixes were addressing the real problems, why do the same outcomes keep returning? We could argue that it's because the fixes weren't good, but let's be real, everyone cannot be wrong all the time. There must be something else there. So let's step back to what we uncovered in the previous section. These events don't just happen once, they repeat. and I repeat myself now too, they repeat across teams, projects, and organizations. They form patterns. So it's not just any patterns, they are structural patterns, which means the recurring ways in which work breaks down, decisions slow down, and priorities drift. Not because of one person or one mistake, but because of how the system consistently behaves. So they aren't random anymore. And this is the key shift in our investigation. Because once we see structural patterns, we know we are no longer looking at isolated problems. We are looking at something systemic. And that means we can try to understand it. But patterns alone don't explain everything. They don't tell us why this is happening yet. They only tell us something deeper is at play. So we figured out what could be underneath the surface. We still don't understand the why. But this leads us to an important realization. Because if these patterns were the actual problem, if stalled decisions, missed deadlines, and defaulting to old routines were the root cause, then fixing them once should have been enough. But we know it isn't. The same problems keep reappearing, the same patterns keep reappearing. Sometimes slightly different format, sometimes literally the same thing. So maybe these patterns aren't the problem. Maybe they are only symptoms, the visible layer of something else, the visible signal of something underneath. Something that we haven't fully seen yet, but that is consistently producing the same outcomes. Something that we keep fighting against without knowing what it is. But that changes how we approach everything. Because if we keep focusing only on what we can see, we're only treating the effects, the symptoms, not the source. We are not removing the problems. It's like mopping up water from the floor while the pipe is still leaking. We will have to keep repeating the same fix over and over again. So now we need to ask, if the structural patterns are symptoms, what are the causes? And what is the system that's creating them? What is happening beneath the surface that keeps producing the same outcomes again and again without us seeing it? To answer that, we don't need to guess. We already have the evidence, and it's been there in every example, in every question we've been asking along the way. Let's see them closely. Think back to those moments. Who actually had the authority to make the decision? Why didn't the information reach the right person in time? Who was responsible and who could actually act? Why did the team fall back to what felt familiar even though they had other tasks introduced? These questions don't point to plans. They don't point to processes. If you notice, they point to something else, something less visible, something that we don't put on paper usually, but something far more consistent across every situation we've seen. Because no matter the example, and we had quite a few in this video, the same underlying elements kept showing up. Not as formal structures, none of this is formal, but they show up in how things actually work in practice. Not in our assumptions, but in day-to-day behavior. And piece by piece, we can start to reconstruct the system. Work doesn't just follow defined processes. It follows the habits people rely on under pressure. Priorities aren't driven only by strategy, but what gets rewarded, recognized, or avoided. Alignment doesn't depend on clarity or saying yes in a meeting. It's on how information actually flows and where it gets stuck. And when you connect all of this together, a different kind of structure begins to emerge. Not the formal organizational plan or a chart or even strategy, but the one that actually drives the behavior inside of it. A system shaped by informal authority, habits and routines, incentives and pressures, communication flows, human relationships and dynamics. These are not written down in one place, or probably not anywhere. They don't appear in organizational chart strategy decks. They are present in every decision, every interaction, and every outcome. And now the patterns we observed earlier start to make more sense. Decisions don't stall randomly, they need someone to approve. The teams don't default to old routines by accident. It's the force of habits and incentives. Misalignment doesn't just happen if it wasn't created from the very beginning. They are produced by this underlying system. The structural patterns we identified, they were never the root cause. They were the symptoms, they were signals, clues pointing us towards something deeper. But it's so easy to get stuck on what is visible, right? But the real driver appears to be this hidden structure of the organization, not just what is designed, but what is actually lived. And this is the key shift. Up until now, we've been looking at outcomes and trying to fix them directly. We've been trying to understand what is happening. But what we're starting to see now is this. The outcomes make sense once you see the system producing them. They are not isolated anymore. They are not random. And why we're not fully understanding that system yet, but we are no longer looking in the wrong place. And that changes everything about how we move forward. In the first video, we asked, why do strategies keep failing? We explored the tools, the frameworks, the solutions. We had the 3 waves of solutions, and we saw that despite them all, the same challenges kept appearing, and they still do, till today. In this video, we took slightly different path. We tried to follow the evidence, from individual events, which turned to be not so isolated events, to repeating patterns, to structural patterns that connected them all. And that led us here, to a simple, but I think important realization. What we've been treating as isolated problems may not be isolated at all. And we have been looking without seeing into something that is real, that does matter, and that does need attention. But these surface level symptoms or problems may not be the full explanation. Because when the same problems keep reappearing across different contexts, it suggests they are being produced, not just encountered. And what is producing them? Something that we still do not see clearly, but that points us to something deeper, to this layer of organization that isn't captured in plans, processes, or structured, or even talked about so far, but it shows up in how things actually happen everywhere. So we only just introduced this layer, and there are still many questions, but the evidence is consistent. Behaviors, incentives, authority, and relationships seem to not be just side effects of the system. They may be the core part of it. That would also explain why focusing only on the visible didn't solve the problem. Because if that's true, then this could be the missing piece in understanding why strategy execution is so difficult, and why, despite having all these elements, it was still inconsistent. And while this is not the final answer, but it's a direction worth investigating. So, what did we actually uncover? What was this video about? We saw that the problems we see every day aren't just isolated issues, and that they are not random. They are signals, they are symptoms of something deeper, of the deeper system, the one that isn't written in frameworks or charts, but is lived and experienced through behavior, decisions, and relationships every single day, everywhere. And we don't fully understand that system yet, but we now know where to look. So we can try to look into it more to try to understand it and understand why. And that changes the question completely, because our next step is no longer how do we fix the symptoms. People were doing that for decades and they keep bothering with it. So our question is, how does this system actually work? And in the next video, we will explore the 3 layers of strategy execution, because improving execution is not just about better plans, it's understanding the system that turns plans into reality and how all of it connects. So we will take what we were talking about before, not looking at separate parts, but parts that create a full system. And that system is more human and more powerful than most frameworks.